Well, look who's here. Say you're sorry, new girl. Ah, my arm!
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's more like it.
Some mornings start like any other. You wake up, you make coffee, you go to work or school or wherever life sends you that day. You don't know it's the last normal morning you'll have for a while. Ren Boone didn't know it either. She was 19 years old, new in town. 3 weeks into the auto trades program at Marion County Technical College. She wasn't there because she loved engines. She was there because her mother was gone, and this was the only place left standing. 3 weeks earlier, Ren had unloaded her whole life out of the back of her grandfather's truck. 2 duffel bags, a box of her mother's photographs, a record player that hadn't worked since the move. That was everything. That was all that survived the last 2 years. Marion County wasn't home yet. It was just the place she landed after home stopped existing. The technical college sat on the edge of town, low brick buildings and a gravel lot, the kind of school built for people who wanted to work with their hands instead of sit behind a desk all day. Ren liked that about it, liked the smell of motor oil in the hallways. It reminded her of the garage back home, the one place that had never once made her feel unwelcome. She kept to herself the first 2 weeks, ate lunched alone, answered questions in class and nothing more. That's how you survive a new place. You make yourself small until you understand the shape of the room. Small didn't work forever. Not with people like Grady Voss around. He noticed her the second week. Noticed she didn't laugh at his jokes. Noticed she didn't flinch when he leaned over her workbench and told her she was doing the torque specs wrong just to see if she'd argue. She hadn't argued. She just fixed it quietly and moved on. Grady didn't like being ignored. Some boys don't. His father was a city councilman. Everybody knew it. Grady made sure of that. Tuesday morning, Ren carried a toolbox down the back hallway of the shop building. Steel-toed boots on cracked linoleum. Ponytail pulled tight. Eyes down. The way you learn to walk when you're new somewhere and you don't want trouble. Trouble found her anyway, it always does. In stories like this one, 4 of them were waiting by the storage room. Grady stood in front, broad shoulders, Letterman jacket, even though this wasn't a school with football. Just a habit he couldn't drop. New girl, Grady said. You're in my seat in diesel systems. Ren stopped walking. There's no assigned seats, there is now. Behind him, 3 others laughed. The kind of laugh that isn't about anything funny. It's about power, about making somebody feel small enough to fit in your pocket. Ren tried to step around them. A hand grabbed her arm, not gentle, not a mistake. A hand that wanted her to know it could hurt her if it wanted to. You do Grady's diagnostic homework, one of the others said. That's how it works here. No, Ren said, just that. One word. Steady, it wasn't the answer they expected. New girls were supposed to fold. That's how the pattern usually went. Grady's face changed. Something ugly moved behind his eyes. Get her in the storage room, he said. What happened next took 11 seconds. 11 seconds most people would never survive without getting hurt. They pulled her backward into the dark little room where the school kept old transmission parts and broken jack stands. Somebody's phone came out, already filming, because that's what happens now. Humiliation isn't complete until it's recorded. One of them wrapped a shop rag around Ren's throat from behind. Pulled it tight, not enough to really hurt her, enough to scare her. Enough to make a video that would follow her name around for years if it ever got posted. Say you're sorry, Grady said, close to her ear. Say you'll do the homework. For half a second, something happened in Ren's body that none of them understood. Her weight dropped, her chin tucked. Her hand found the wrist behind her neck and turned it. A small, precise motion, the kind you only learn from years of repetition, not instinct, the boy holding the rag gasped. His grip loosened on its own, like his hand had just been told a secret about pain. Ren could have finished it right there. She'd been trained to finish it right there. Instead, she let go, stepped back, let her shoulders drop into something soft and frightened, something these boys would recognize and feel good about. She let them see a scared girl. Not what she actually was. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I'm sorry. Grady smiled like he'd won something. The rag came off her neck. The phone stopped recording because scared girls apologizing wasn't the kind of content that spread online. Fear had to look bigger than that. Fear had to look like victory. They walked away laughing. Ren stood alone in the storage room, breathing hard, rubbing her throat. Not from what they did to her, from what she didn't let herself do back. 20 miles away, in a garage that smelled like engine oil and cut grass, a 64-year-old man named Silas Boone was on his back under a 1978 Harley Shovelhead, tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. People called him Preacher. Had for almost 40 years. Nobody remembered exactly why anymore. Something about the way he talked. Slow, careful, like every sentence had already been thought through twice before it left his mouth. Silas had spent 30 years fixing things. Motorcycles, mostly. Sometimes people, if they let him. His phone rang on the workbench. He didn't like phones ringing during work. Bad news traveled on phones. Good news, people usually told you in person. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered it anyway. "This is Dean Whitfield's office," a voice said. "Calling about your granddaughter." Silas sat up slow. "What happened?" "There was an incident. Some horseplay between students." "Ren is fine. We just wanted you informed." Silas had heard men lie to him before, in briefing rooms, in hospital hallways. In courtrooms, he knew the sound lying made. That word, horseplay, had that sound. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up before they could talk him out of it. He pulled a leather jacket off a hook by the door. Old thing. Patches faded from 30 years of weather. On the back, stitched in letters that had cracked and been redone twice, it said Iron Wolves. He didn't ride with the club as often anymore. Age does that. Slows a man down, even one who refuses to admit it. But some mornings still call for the jacket. This was one of them. Silas walked through the front doors at 11:40 that morning. Boots first. That's how you'd describe him if you saw him coming. Heavy boots on tile floor, a sound that made office workers look up from their desks. He found the administration wing without asking directions. Man his age. You learn how buildings are laid out just by walking into enough of them. Dean Aaron Whitfield's office had his name on a brass plate, polished enough to catch the light. Whitfield was maybe 50. Soft hands, the kind of man who'd spent his whole career moving from one office to a slightly bigger office, and thought that counted as a journey. "Mr. Boone," Whitfield said, standing. "Please, sit down." Silas didn't sit down. "Where's my granddaughter?" "She's in class. Ren is fine." "I promise you that. Tell me what happened." Whitfield's hands folded together on the desk. A gesture men make when they're about to say less than they know. There was some horseplay in the storage corridor. A misunderstanding between students. "We take these things seriously here." "Horseplay," Silas repeated. "Yes, somebody used that word on the phone too. Funny how it's the same word twice." Whitfield's smile got tighter. "I can assure you, was there a rag around my granddaughter's neck?" The office went quiet. Whitfield hadn't expected the old man to already know that much. Somebody had talked. A student, probably. Word travels fast in a small building. "There was an altercation," Whitfield said carefully. "It's being handled internally." "Handled how?" "We spoke to the students involved." "You spoke to them?" "Yes." Silas leaned forward, both hands flat on the desk. Not threatening, just present. "The way a man stands when he wants you to know he isn't leaving until he gets an actual answer, son," Silas said. "I've buried people I loved. I've fixed engines that should have killed the men driving them. I know the difference between somebody handling a problem and somebody making a problem disappear so it doesn't cost them anything." Whitfield looked down at his desk. "Grady Voss's father sits on the city council," Whitfield said quietly. "He's also on our board of trustees. He funded the new diesel bay we just installed, so that's the math," Silas said. "It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You just told me the reason." Whitfield didn't answer. Silas straightened up, looked around the office, the diplomas on the wall, the framed photo of some ribbon-cutting ceremony. The whole careful architecture of a man's small, comfortable life. "I'm not here to burn your school down," Silas said. "I'm here because somebody put a rag around my granddaughter's throat and you called it horseplay on the phone. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset yet. This is me calm. You should hope it stays that way." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. "You said students plural. How many?" Whitfield hesitated. "4, and how many were holding my granddaughter down?" "1, and the other 3. They were present." Silas nodded slowly like a man confirming something he already suspected. "Present," he said. "That's a word too." He walked out without waiting for a response. In the parking lot, an old cruiser sat idling near the flagpole. Sheriff Tom Kessler leaned against the hood, arms crossed, watching Silas come down the steps. They'd known each other 20 years, fished the same stretch of river every spring, buried a mutual friend 3 summers back. "Heard there was some trouble," Kessler said. "You heard right? You want to file something?" Silas stopped beside him, looked out at the flat, Ordinary parking lot, like it hadn't just been the scene of something ugly the day before. Not yet, Silas said. Right now it's my word and a school administrator's word. And administrators have a way of winning that kind of argument. You know the family? Voss, yeah. Kessler's jaw tightened just slightly. Roy Voss makes life difficult for people who make life difficult for him. You'd be wise to have something solid before you push. I usually am, Silas said. Kessler nodded, like that settled it for now. You need anything, preacher. You call me. Day or night, same goes. Kessler watched him a moment longer before adding, you know, most men your age would have called a lawyer by now, not driven straight to a school to stare down a dean. Lawyers are for people who've given up on getting an honest answer out of somebody first, Silas said. I haven't given up on that yet, and if you do, then you'll be the second call I make, Silas said. Right after Duke, Kessler almost smiled at that. Fair enough. Go easy today, preacher. I mean that. Silas got in his truck and drove home slower than usual, turning the whole conversation over in his mind the way he'd turn a stripped bolt, looking for the one angle that would finally get it loose. Silas found Wren outside on a concrete bench near the parking lot, sitting with her knees pulled up, staring at nothing in particular. She saw him coming and quickly wiped her face, even though there was nothing there to wipe. A habit, something you do when you don't want to be seen needing anybody. Grandpa, you didn't have to come, yeah? I did. He sat down next to her. The bench was cold. Neither of them minded. They said it was a misunderstanding, Wren said. I heard a different word. Horseplay. Wren almost laughed, but it came out broken in the middle. Sure, horseplay. Silas looked at her neck. There was a faint pink line there already fading, the kind of mark that wouldn't show in a photograph by tomorrow. Convenient for people who wanted this to disappear. You want to tell me what actually happened, Silas said. Not a demand. An offer. Wren was quiet a long moment. She thought about telling him everything. The rag, the hand on her arm, the 11 seconds where her whole body remembered exactly what to do. And did none of it, because doing it would mean explaining why a 19-year-old girl from a small town knew how to break a grown man's grip like that. She wasn't ready to open that door yet. They grabbed me, Wren said instead. Told me to do somebody's homework. I said no. It got scary for a second. Then it stopped. All true. Just not all of it. Silas studied her face the way he studied an engine that wasn't running right, looking for the part that didn't match the sound it was making. He didn't push. 30 years fixing motorcycles teaches you something about patience. Some bolts you don't force. You wait for the right angle, and they come loose on their own. All right, he said. You want to go home? I have diesel systems at 1. You don't have to go back in there today. If I don't go back in, Wren said, they win. Silas looked at his granddaughter for a long moment. Something in his chest tightened, proud and afraid in the same breath, the way it does when you watch somebody you love choose the harder road on purpose. All right, he said. But I'm walking you to your next class, Grandpa. I'm 19. I'm 64. Humor an old man for the first time since 11 that morning. Wren almost smiled. The Boone house sat at the end of a gravel road, half a mile from the nearest neighbor, close enough to town to hear the church bells on Sunday and far enough away that nobody bothered you. The other 6 days, Silas had built the garage himself in 1994, added onto it twice since. It was bigger than the house now, if you measured square footage, which told you something about where his heart actually lived. That night, after a dinner neither of them finished, Wren sat at the kitchen table while Silas made coffee he didn't need at 9 o'clock. You didn't finish your plate, he said. Not hungry? He set the coffee pot down and sat across from her. Your mother used to do that. Not eat when something was sitting wrong in her chest. Drove me crazy. I never could get her to just say the thing. Wren looked up. Her mother's name still landed heavy in this house, almost 2 years after the accident. Some grief doesn't get lighter. It just gets quieter, learns to sit in the corner instead of the middle of the room. I don't want to talk about today, Wren said. Okay, I mean it. I'm fine. Okay, Silas said again, gentler this time. He didn't argue. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago with people who mattered even more than an engine that wouldn't turn over. Some doors you don't kick down. You leave the key on the table and you wait. They sat in silence a while, the kind of silence that isn't empty, just full of things neither person is ready to say yet. You still want to train tomorrow? Silas asked finally. Wren's eyes came up. Training was the one thing that hadn't stopped in 2 years of things stopping. Her mother's funeral, the move across 3 states, a new school, new town, new life folded into a duffel bag and a truck bed. Through all of it, 5:30 in the morning in that garage had stayed the same. Yeah, Wren said. I want to train. Nobody in this town knew what happened in that garage before sunrise. They knew Silas Boone. Knew him as the biker who fixed their trucks cheap and didn't ask questions about why the payment was late. Knew him from the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, the one that did the toy drive every December and escorted funerals for veterans who didn't have family left to carry the flag. Nobody knew that 35 years ago, before the garage, before any of it, Silas had spent a decade teaching hand-to-hand combat to young soldiers who needed to survive situations no 18-year-old should ever have to survive. He didn't talk about those years. Not to strangers. Barely to himself. But some things don't leave a man's hands, even after the uniform comes off and the years pile up, and the only fighting left is against rust and bad carburetors. What he'd carried out of that decade wasn't stories. It was a simple, stubborn belief. Fear wasn't the enemy. Helplessness was. You couldn't always control what happened to you. But you could control whether you stood there frozen when it did, or whether your body already knew what to do next. That belief became more than a belief the day his daughter, Ren's mother Claire, died on a rain-slicked county road 2 years back. A truck crossing the center line. A phone call at 11 at night that changed the shape of everything after it. Silas had held Ren at that funeral, both of them soaked through from standing too long in the rain, neither one able to say much of anything. He remembered thinking, somewhere in the numb middle of that week, that grief without purpose just curdles into something worse. He needed to build something out of the wreckage, or it was going to bury him too, so he built a fighter, not because he wanted Ren to become someone hard. Because he never again wanted her to stand somewhere helpless, the way he'd felt standing over Claire's casket, unable to fix the one thing that mattered most. Ren had understood that, even at 17, even through her own grief. That's why she showed up every morning without being asked twice. Some inheritances come in the form of money, or land, or an old motorcycle in a garage. Hers came in the shape of a stance, a breath, a body that knew how to move when the moment demanded it. Again, Silas said one morning, months before any of this began. Slower this time. Feel where the weight goes. Ren reset her stance on the old wrestling mat they kept rolled up against the wall except for these mornings. I already know this one, Grandpa. Knowing it and having it live in your bones, that's two different things. She ran the sequence again. A grab from behind, a drop of the hips, a turn of the wrist that looked simple and wasn't. There it is, Silas said quiet. That's the one that saves your life someday. Ren straightened up, breathing hard, sweat on her collar even in the cold morning air. Why do you think I'll need it? She asked. Not for the first time. Silas leaned against the workbench. Old scars on his knuckles, the kind you don't get from turning wrenches. Because the world doesn't ask permission before it gets ugly, he said, and I'd rather you have something in your hands. Besides fear when it does. He didn't say the rest of it. The part where he was 64 years old and wouldn't be around forever to stand between his granddaughter and whatever came next. He didn't have to say it. She already understood. Later that same week, before any of the worst of it began, Ren had asked him something she'd been turning over for a while. Do you ever regret teaching me all this? She said, toweling sweat off her neck after a morning session. Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if you'd just taught me to fix carburetors and left it at that. Silas considered the question with the same weight he gave every question that actually mattered to him. Some mornings, yeah, he admitted. Some mornings I look at you and think, this girl should get to just be 19. Worry about exams and boys and what she's doing this weekend, not stances and grips and how to break a hold safely. That thought visits me plenty, but then I think about what almost happened to your mother the year she was your age, Silas said. Different kind of trouble than yours. Still trouble. Still a moment where being able to protect herself would have mattered more than anything else in the world. Ren went still. You never told me that, not my story to tell in full, Silas said. But it's part of why I started teaching you the day you asked me to. I wasn't going to lose 2 generations of women in my life to a moment where somebody bigger decided what was going to happen to their body. Ren sat with that a long moment, something in her chest settling heavier and steadier at once. I'm glad you taught me, she said quietly. Even on the hard mornings. Even when I complained about getting up so early, you complained plenty, Silas said, a small smile breaking through. I was 17 when we started. Complaining's part of the job description. They'd sat together a while longer that morning, the shop light humming overhead, neither one of them knowing yet how soon all of it would be tested. By Thursday. The story had grown legs. That's how it works in a small school. A rumor doesn't need facts. It just needs a hallway and enough bored people passing through it. Somebody had talked about the storage room. Not the video that never got posted because a scared girl apologizing wasn't good content. But the story got out anyway, twisted into something bigger and meaner with every retelling. Ren walked the hallway to her welding class with her eyes forward, the way you learn to walk when everybody's watching and pretending not to. Somebody laughed as she passed. A girl she didn't know, whispering to a friend, not bothering to whisper quiet enough. Grady didn't even have to say anything anymore. He'd built the fire. Now it burned on its own, the way cruelty does once it gets enough oxygen. Ren found an empty stairwell between classes and sat down on the cold concrete step alone, just for a minute. Just long enough to breathe. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A single sentence, "Bet your grandpa would love to see the video." There was no video, but they didn't know that. Or maybe they did, and the threat worked just as well either way. Fear doesn't need proof. It just needs a phone and enough silence to grow in. Ren stared at the screen a long time. Something in her chest, that had been carefully, deliberately quiet for 3 years of training, started to feel very loud. She thought about her mother. About the last real conversation they'd had, weeks before the accident, when her mother had asked why she kept getting up so early to go to Grandpa's garage. "It makes me feel like I'm not just waiting for something bad to happen," Ren had told her. Her mother had smiled, sad and proud at once. "That's not nothing, baby. That's actually everything." Ren wiped her eyes, once, hard, put her phone away, stood up waiting for something bad to happen was over. She just didn't know yet what she was going to do about it. That same afternoon, Ren sat in the college library with the only person at Marion County who'd bothered to be kind to her without an angle, a soft-spoken classmate named Odessa Pruitt, who fixed transmissions better than half the boys in the program and had zero patience for any of them. "You look like something's chewing you up inside," Odessa said, not looking up from her textbook. "I'm fine. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it true." Ren almost laughed. "It's a lot." Grady and his friends. People talking. Some idiot texting me about a video that doesn't even exist. Odessa closed her book. "You want me to tell you something? Grady Voss picks on people because everybody's too scared of his last name to push back. Nobody's ever made him actually feel it." "Feel what?" "Consequences," Odessa said simply. "The man's never had one in his life." Ren didn't answer that. She just turned it over quietly in her mind, the way you turn over a stone in a riverbed, checking what's underneath. She wasn't ready to say what she was capable of, not even to someone as steady as Odessa. But something had loosened in her chest since that text message arrived. Since the small, unnoticed truth she'd finally said out loud to herself. She was starting to understand that consequences might be coming for Grady Voss, whether she planned them or not. "You ever think about just leaving?" Odessa asked, closing her notebook. "Transferring somewhere else? Starting fresh where nobody's heard any of this yet?" Ren considered it a moment, genuinely, the way you consider an easy way out before deciding against it. "I thought about it the first week," she admitted, "but I'm tired of starting over. This is the third school in 2 years. At some point you have to just stand somewhere and let it be your place. Even if it's hard, that's either really brave or really stubborn," Odessa said. "Probably both," Ren said. "Most things worth doing usually are." Down the hall, in his office with the brass nameplate, Dean Whitfield sat alone after everyone else had gone home for the day. He hadn't told Silas Boone the whole truth that morning. Hadn't told him about the phone call he'd gotten from Roy Voss 2 days before the incident even happened. A call reminding him, in that friendly, dangerous tone powerful men use, that the Diesel Bay renovation still had one more funding installment coming. Nothing explicit. Voss never said anything explicit. Just enough of a reminder to make a tired Dean look the other way a little longer than he should have. Whitfield rubbed his eyes. He'd taken this job to help kids build a future with their hands, back when the mission had still felt clean and simple. Somewhere along the way, funding and politics had gotten tangled up with everything else, until he barely recognized the shape of his own conscience some days. He thought about the old biker's voice in his office that morning, steady, unimpressed by any of Whitfield's careful language. "I know the difference between somebody handling a problem and somebody making a problem disappear." Whitfield sat with that a long time after the building had gone quiet around him. He didn't have an answer yet, but the question wasn't going away. Friday night, the Iron Wolves met at their clubhouse on the edge of town, an old feed store converted 40 years ago into something between a garage, a bar, and a living room for men who didn't always have somewhere else to be. Silas came in later than usual, still carrying the tightness in his jaw from the week. Walt, Duke, Renner was already at the bar, nursing a beer he'd been nursing for an hour. The way men do when the point isn't the drink. Duke had ridden with Silas for over 30 years. 2 divorces between them, 1 funeral for a wife, and enough miles on the road to circle the country a dozen times. Some friendships don't need much explaining. They just need time. "You look like a man carrying something," Duke said. Silas sat down heavy on the stool next to him. "Some kids grabbed Ren at school. Put a rag around her neck. School's calling it horseplay." Duke's face went hard and quiet. He had granddaughters of his own. You know who, Voss's boy. Grady. Duke went still for a second. Something crossed his face, recognition, maybe, or memory trying to surface from somewhere deep and old. "Voss," Duke said slowly, as in Rovas. "City Council, that's the one." Duke set his beer down. "Silas, you remember the community gym program, back when the county still funded it? Free classes for kids whose parents couldn't afford the private dojo in the city." Silas frowned. "That was, what, 12, 13 years back?" 13. "You ran it 2 summers before your knees gave out, and you handed it to somebody else." "I remember." "You remember a scrawny kid, 6, maybe 7 years old, cried the first week because the other boys were faster than him. You worked with him after class every day till he could hold his own." Something in Silas's chest went cold and slow, the way it does when a memory you'd filed away quietly starts pulling itself back out into the light. "What are you telling me, Duke?" Duke pulled out his phone, scrolled a minute, turned the screen around, an old photo. Faded, low resolution, the kind phones took over a decade ago. A summer day at the county gym. A younger Silas kneeling next to a small boy in an oversized G. Both of them grinning at the camera. Silas took the phone, stared at the photo a long moment. The boy's face, 13 years younger and 13 years softer, was unmistakable once you knew to look. "That's Grady," Silas said quietly. "That's Grady," Duke confirmed. "Roy Voss's boy. You taught that kid how to stand up for himself before he even started grade school." Silas set the phone down on the bar, slow, like it had gotten heavier in his hand. For a long moment he didn't say anything. 13 years ago, he'd knelt beside a frightened boy and told him the same thing he'd tell Ren years later. That fear doesn't make you weak. It just means something matters enough to be scared of losing it. That boy had grown up into someone who put a rag around a girl's throat for saying no. Somewhere between that gym and that storage room, something had gone very wrong. And Silas couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had gone wrong wasn't really about the boy at all. Boys don't become that on their own. Somebody teaches them, same as Silas had once taught Grady something better. "You all right?" Duke asked. "I think," Silas said slowly, "there's more to this than a bad kid acting out. I think there's a father in this somewhere who taught his son that power is the only language worth speaking. So what do you do about it?" Silas looked toward the door, out past it into the dark, in the direction of the gravel road that led home to his granddaughter. "Same thing I've always done," he said. "Fix what I can, protect what matters, and wait for the right moment to turn the wrench." Around them, the clubhouse carried on the way it always did on a Friday night. A dozen other iron wolves scattered around the room, men in their 50s, 60s, a few pushing 80, all of them carrying the same quiet weight of years behind their eyes. This wasn't a gang, never had been. It was closer to a church that met in a garage instead of a chapel. Men who'd learned the hard way that brotherhood keeps you upright when nothing else will. They'd buried 3 members in the last decade, raised money for a 4th one's medical bills the year his insurance ran out. Rode 200 miles once, all of them together, just to stand outside a courthouse in a show of quiet support for a member's daughter going through something ugly in family court. That was the club, not the leather, not the motorcycles. "The showing up, you going to tell the girl any of this?" Duke asked. "About Grady." Silas considered it a long moment. "Not yet," he said. "She's got enough weighing on her right now. This is mine to carry until I understand it better. And Voss? You think he knows his boy ever set foot in that gym?" "I don't know what Roy Voss remembers," Silas said. "Man like that, I doubt he was ever the one dropping his kid off. Probably had somebody else do it. Then who taught the boy to turn into what he is now?" Silas didn't have an answer to that one yet. But it was the question that was going to matter most, before this whole thing was over. He finished his coffee, black, no sugar. He hadn't touched a drink in 15 years. But he still sat at that bar most Fridays, because the seat next to Duke was where he did his best thinking. "I appreciate you telling me," Silas said, standing to leave. "About the photo. About the gym. You would have found it eventually," Duke said. "Things like this always surface. Just a matter of when." Silas clapped a hand on his old friend's shoulder. and headed out into the cold parking lot toward his truck. He drove home slow, the old photograph still sitting behind his eyes. A small boy in an oversized G grinning up at a younger version of himself. 13 years before that same boy grew into someone capable of putting a rag around a girl's throat. Somewhere between that photo and this week, a story had gone wrong. Silas Boone intended to find out exactly where. Back home, Wren stood alone in the garage after midnight, unable to sleep. She pulled the old porch light on, just enough glow to see by, and unrolled the mat from where it sat against the wall. No music, no grandfather standing beside her, correcting her stance. Just her, and the memory of every morning that had brought her here. She ran the sequence once, slow. The grab, the drop, the turn, then again, faster. Then again, faster still. Until her body wasn't thinking anymore, just moving the way 3 years of 5:30 mornings had taught it to move. She thought about the storage room. About the version of herself that had stepped back, gone soft, said, "Okay, I'm sorry," to keep a secret that had already cost her more than she wanted to admit. She thought about the unknown number. The threat about a video that didn't exist but might as well have. She thought about her mother's voice. "That's not nothing, baby. That's actually everything." Wren stopped in the middle of the mat, breathing hard, sweat cooling on her neck in the cold garage air. Something had shifted in her this week. Quiet, but real. The kind of shift you don't announce. You just feel it settle into your spine and know it's not going away. She wasn't going to hide what she was anymore. Not because she wanted a fight. Because she was done being afraid of one. Monday morning, back at school, 3 students happened to be walking past the outdoor equipment yard when Grady's friend Cody grabbed Wren's bag off her shoulder as a joke. The kind of joke that isn't a joke, just cruelty wearing a smaller costume. Wren turned, didn't think, didn't decide. Her body simply remembered what 3 years and 5:30 mornings had built into it. Her hand caught his wrist mid-motion, a small twist. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would look like violence on a phone camera. But Cody dropped the bag immediately, gasping, stumbling back a step, shock written plain across his face. "What the hell?" he said. "How'd you do that?" Wren picked up her bag off the ground, slung it back over her shoulder, didn't answer. The 3 students who'd seen it exchanged a look, a quiet, uneasy look. The kind that says something about that girl is not what we thought it was. Word doesn't travel as fast as cruelty does, in a school like this one, but it travels. By Monday afternoon, a small, strange rumor had started making its way through Marion County Technical College. Quieter than the one about the storage room, but somehow more unsettling to the people who heard it. Don't mess with the new girl. There's something off about her. She moved like she's done this before. Grady heard the rumor secondhand, at lunch, from somebody who wasn't even sure it was true. He laughed it off in front of his friends. But that night, alone in his room, staring at his phone, he found himself thinking about it longer than he wanted to admit. Something about a scared girl in a storage room didn't line up anymore with a girl who could disarm somebody in half a second without even trying. He didn't know it yet, but the ground under his whole comfortable, careless life had just quietly started to shift. That night, Silas sat alone on his porch long after Wren had gone to bed, a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. The stars were out thick over Maple Hollow Road, the kind of sky you only get far enough from town that the streetlights stop stealing it from you. He thought about the photograph Duke had shown him. A small boy, scared and eager to learn, kneeling next to a version of himself that still had a little more spring in his knees. He thought about Wren, 3 years old to that memory, learning the same kind of lesson in this same kind of quiet, for reasons that had started out so different, and somehow ended up so close together. 2 children, 2 very different homes. One of them raised to believe fear was something to master and turn toward protecting others. The other, it seemed, raised to believe fear was something you handed to somebody smaller than you, so you never had to carry it yourself. Silas didn't know yet how deep that difference went, or how far back it started, or how many other lives it had already touched before it ever reached his granddaughter in a storage room on a Tuesday morning. He only knew one thing for certain, sitting there under all those stars with a cold cup of coffee and 30 years of hard-won patience behind his eyes. Whatever this turned out to be, he wasn't going to let it finish the way it started. Not for Wren. Not for the boy in that old photograph either. If there was still something worth saving in him, some fix engines their whole lives and call it a trade. Silas had always believed the real work was fixing what happened to people when the world forgot to protect them the way it should have. He finished his coffee, cold as it was, and went inside to sleep. Tomorrow was going to ask more of him than today had. He could feel it coming, the way you feel weather change before the sky admits it. Before he turned in, he checked the lock on the garage out of habit. Same as every night, the old wrestling mat rolled neatly against the wall inside, waiting for tomorrow's 5:30 session, same as it had every morning for 3 years running. He thought, standing there in the dark with his hand on the latch, that whatever answers this week still owed him, they were going to come whether he went looking for them or not. Better to go looking. A man who waits for trouble to explain itself usually waits too long. He locked the door, crossed the dark yard back to the house, and let the quiet of Maple Hollow Road settle around him one more night before everything started moving faster than either he or his granddaughter were fully ready for. The following Monday, a banner went up across the front of Marion County Technical College Fall Trading Fair. 4 days every year the same event. Families came from 3 counties over. Local shops set up booths. Students demonstrated what they'd learned: welding, diesel repair, small engine rebuilds, in front of judges, parents, and a stage the whole county turned out to watch. For most students, it was a chance to show off a semester's worth of work. For Grady Voss, this year, it was going to be something else entirely. He sat with his 3 friends at a corner table in the shop building's break room, voice low, the kind of low that means the words underneath matter more than the ones on top. "Fair's got an open mic slot," Grady said, end of the day. "Anybody can sign up, do a demonstration, whatever." Cody, the one who'd grabbed Ren's bag the week before and still had a faint bruise on his wrist he didn't like to talk about, leaned in. "You thinking what I think you're thinking? New girl thinks she's tough now," Grady said. "Word's gotten around about that thing with your wrist. People are starting to look at her different. I don't like it. So what, we jump her again? After last time?" "No," Grady said. "Smarter than that. We get her up on that stage in front of the whole county. Make her look small in front of everybody at once. No storage room this time. No secrets. Just everybody sees exactly what she is," which is what Grady's jaw tightened. Nobody, he didn't say the rest of what was underneath that word, didn't say that ever since the rumor about the wrist trick had spread, something in his own chest had started feeling smaller too, and he didn't like that feeling one bit. Boys like Grady rarely examine why cruelty feels like relief. They just keep reaching for it. 4 days, Grady said. Plenty of time to set it up right. After school, Grady drove out past the edge of town, past his father's construction yard, out to the overlook where he and his friends usually killed a few hours when nobody expected anything from them. He sat on the tailgate of his truck, staring out at the county below, quiet in a way his friends had learned not to interrupt. "You good?" Cody asked eventually. "Fine, you've been weird all week." Grady didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the rumor, the wrist trick, the way 3 witnesses had gone quiet and strange after seeing it, the way something about that girl didn't add up to the story he'd built in his head about her. He didn't like things that didn't add up. His whole life had been built on things adding up exactly the way he expected them to. Money adding up to comfort, his last name adding up to safety, trouble adding up to somebody else's problem, never his own. A scared new girl who turned out to be something else entirely didn't fit anywhere in that math. "You ever feel like your whole life is something somebody else built for you?" Grady asked. Out of nowhere, staring at the horizon, Cody blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "Nothing." Forget it, he didn't bring it up again. Didn't know how to say the rest of it. That some nights, alone in his room, he felt like a stranger wearing his own name, performing a version of confidence that had nothing underneath it holding it up. He drove home before dark, the plan for the fair still sitting unfinished in his mind, restless in a way he couldn't name. Ren heard about the trade fair the same way everyone else did. A banner, an announcement, a countdown taped to the wall of the main hallway, with a marker crossing off each day as it passed. 4 days. She didn't think much of it at first. Just another school event, the kind she'd have gladly skipped if it were optional. It wasn't optional. Attendance was mandatory for anyone in a trade program. That meant Grady would be there. That meant she would be there. That meant 4 more days of walking hallways that had gotten a little colder toward her since the incident with the wrist. That evening, she mentioned it to Silas over dinner, mostly as an afterthought. "Trade fair's this Friday," she said. "Whole county shows up, apparently." Silas looked up from his plate. Something moved behind his eyes, memory maybe, or calculation. He'd lived in this county his whole life. He knew exactly what kind of event drew every family, every politician, every person with something to prove into one gymnasium at once. "Roy Voss going to be there?" he asked. "I don't know. Probably. His son goes to my school." He'll be there, Silas said quietly. Man like that doesn't miss a stage with his name attached to it. Wren studied her grandfather's face. Something had changed in him since Friday night, since he'd come home from the clubhouse quieter than usual, carrying a weight he hadn't explained yet. You've been different since Friday, she said. You still haven't told me why. Silas set down his fork. There's something I'm working through, he said, not ready to lay it all out yet. When I understand it fully, you'll be the first to know. That another one of your patience lessons? A small, tired smile crossed his face. Maybe it is. At school Tuesday, Wren found Odessa in the library again, the countdown banner visible through the window behind her. 3 days now, instead of 4. You signing up for anything at the fair? Odessa asked, not looking up from the transmission diagram she was sketching. Didn't plan to. Why? There's an open mic thing. Demonstrations, whatever. Half the shop kids do it for extra credit. Wren frowned slightly. Grady's group been talking about it. Kept getting quiet whenever I walked by their table. Odessa set her pencil down, studying her friend's face. You think they're planning something? I don't know. Maybe I'm just paranoid after last week. You're not paranoid, Odessa said flatly. Boys like Grady don't let things go, especially not after getting embarrassed in front of witnesses. That's the one thing his kind can't stand, looking small in front of an audience. Wren thought about that, turning it over slowly. If they try something at the fair, she said, it won't be like the storage room. Too many people around. Too many parents, teachers, cameras. Which means whatever they plan, Odessa said, it'll be designed to look like nothing to anybody watching and feel like everything to you. Wren looked up sharply, something in that sentence landing harder than she expected. Whatever they're planning, Odessa said, closing her notebook, you're not walking into that fair alone. I'll be right there in the crowd. Wren managed a small, grateful smile. Thanks. That actually helps more than you know. That's what people are supposed to do for each other, Odessa said simply, standing to head to her next class. Shocking concept around here, I know. She paused at the door, turning back. For what it's worth, Odessa added, whatever they're planning, you don't have to prove anything to anybody in that crowd, not even to me. You just have to walk out of there still standing, however that ends up looking. That's not much of a bar to clear, Wren said. It's the only bar that actually matters, Odessa said. Everything else is just noise people convince themselves is important. Wednesday afternoon, Silas was under a truck in his garage when a car he didn't recognize pulled up the gravel drive. Black sedan, freshly washed out against the dust and rust of Maple Hollow Road. He slid out from under the truck, wiped his hands, and watched Roy Voss step out of the driver's seat, dressed the way men dress when they want a conversation to feel like a business meeting instead of what it actually is. Silas had seen Roy Voss around town for years. City council meetings, ribbon cuttings, the occasional charity dinner Silas got dragged to by the club for one cause or another. They'd never spoken more than a few words directly, Mr. Boone, Voss said. Extending a hand Silas didn't take, Councilman. Voss let the hand drop, unbothered, the way a man does when rejection barely registers anymore. I wanted to speak with you personally, Voss said. About the incident at the school. I understand there was some confusion. Wasn't confusion. Your boy and his friends put a rag around my granddaughter's neck. Voss's expression didn't shift. Practiced stillness, the kind politicians learn early. Boys that age make mistakes, Voss said. I've spoken to Grady. He understands the seriousness of it. Has he apologized to Wren? I think it's best these things get resolved quietly, without escalation, without lawyers, without headlines, without anything that follows either of our families around for years. Silas leaned against the truck's fender, arms crossed. You didn't drive all the way out here to talk about apologies, Councilman. Say what you actually came to say. Voss's smile thinned just slightly, the mask slipping a fraction. I've heard you've been asking questions, Voss said. About my son, about old programs at the county gym. Silas kept his face still. So word had already traveled that far. That surprise you? Silas asked. Small county. People talk. I'd hate for old history to get mixed up with a school squabble, Voss said. Wouldn't help your granddaughter's case. Wouldn't help anybody. There it was. Not a threat, not exactly. Just enough weight behind the words to feel like one. The way men like Voss always managed to make pressure sound like friendly advice. Silas straightened up slow, closing the distance by half a step. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind Voss whose driveway he was standing in. You're worried about old history, Silas said. That tells me there's history worth worrying about. Voss's jaw ticked, just once. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Boone, he said, and got back in his car without waiting for a response. Silas watched the sedan pull away down the gravel road, dust rising behind it in the afternoon light. He stood there a long moment after it disappeared, turning the conversation over the way he'd turn a part he didn't trust, looking for the crack that would tell him where it was going to fail. A man doesn't warn you off a subject unless the subject can hurt him. Silas intended to find out exactly how. That evening, he called Duke. "Voss came to my house today," Silas said. "No greeting, straight to it. What'd he want? Told me not to go digging into old history, old programs." "The county gym." Duke was quiet a second. "So he knows you know," somebody told him. "Question is who, and why it scared him enough to drive out personally instead of just calling. You want me to ask around? See if anybody remembers more about that gym program? Who ran the books? Who signed kids up? Anything from back then?" "Yeah," Silas said. Quietly, though. "I don't want this getting back to Voss faster than we can use it. You think there's something bigger under this?" Silas looked out the kitchen window at the dark shape of his garage, where the old memorial motorcycle sat under its canvas cover, untouched for 2 years except to be cleaned. "I think a man doesn't get that nervous over a summer program from 13 years ago," Silas said. "Unless something happened in it he spent 13 years trying to bury." Duke was quiet a moment on the other end. "I'll make some calls. See what Ellen Marsh remembers. She ran the sign-up desk back then. Woman never throws a record away in her life. Appreciate it. You all right, Silas?" Silas thought about the question longer than it probably needed. "I will be," he said, "once I understand what I'm actually standing in front of." The next afternoon, Silas drove into town and stopped by the sheriff's office, more out of habit than any real plan. Kessler was at his desk, boots up, going through paperwork he clearly didn't want to be doing. "You look like a man with something on his mind," Kessler said, not looking up. "Voss came by my place yesterday. Told me to stop asking questions about old history." Kessler set his pen down slow. "What kind of old history?" "County gym program. 13 years back. I taught self-defense there 2 summers. I remember that program," Kessler said. "My cousin's kid went through it. Good thing, while it lasted. Budget cuts killed it eventually. You remember anything unusual from back then? Any incidents?" Kessler thought a moment, then shook his head slowly. "Not that I recall directly." "Why?" "Because Voss drove out to my house personally to warn me off it. Man like that doesn't waste an afternoon on nothing." Kessler leaned back in his chair, studying his old friend. "You think there's something buried in that program worth him being scared of?" "I think I'm about to find out," Silas said. "And when I do, I may need you to make it official, not just something I know. Something the county has to answer for." Kessler nodded slowly. "You find something solid, you bring it to me first. Not to a news camera, not to some lawyer looking for a payday. To me. I'll make sure it gets handled right. That's all I'm asking." Silas stood to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing," he said. "Keep an ear out around the trade fair Friday. Something's building with these kids. I can feel it." "I'll have a car nearby," Kessler said. "Just in case." Silas nodded once and left, the gravel crunching under his boots as he crossed the lot toward his truck, the weight of the coming days settling heavier on his shoulders with every step. Thursday, one day before the fair, Duke found Silas at the Iron Wolves clubhouse in the early afternoon, a folder of old photographs under his arm and a look on his face like a man carrying something heavier than paper. "Found more," Duke said, setting the folder down on the bar top. "Talked to Ellen Marsh. She kept records nobody ever asked her to throw away." Ellen Marsh was 71 years old, half blind in one eye, and sharper than most people half her age. Duke had found her at the county library, still volunteering 3 days a week the way she'd done for decades. Unable to sit still in retirement any more than Silas could, she hadn't needed much convincing to talk. Some people carry old stories for years just waiting for somebody to finally ask. She remembered the fire, Duke said. Said the whole county talked about it for a week afterward. Man nearly died in that barn during the county fair setup, back when they still ran the woodworking demonstrations there. She remembered because her husband helped organize the fair that summer, and it nearly got the whole event shut down over safety concerns. She remembered who pulled him out? She remembered a name that got left out of every newspaper account, Duke said. Said the paper credited the volunteer fire department that arrived after the fact. Never once mentioned the man who'd already carried the victim out before they got there. Silas sat with that a moment, an old, familiar ache settling into his chest. He'd never wanted credit back then. Still didn't, really. But hearing it laid out plain, a man's whole act of decency erased from the record, before it even had a chance to matter, stung in a way he hadn't expected. "Open the folder," Duke said quietly. Silas did. more photographs from the summer gym program, and near the bottom, a single black and white printout of an old incident report from the county fairgrounds workshop. Dated the same summer. Silas read it slow. His face changed halfway through. "Duke," he said, "this is the machine shop fire. The one from that old barn. Read the names at the bottom. Silas did worker injured. Roy Voss, age 31, minor burns, smoke inhalation. Rescued by Silas Boone, volunteer instructor off duty." Silas sat down heavy on the stool by the bar. He remembered that day. Had thought about it maybe twice in 13 years, filed away the way you file away any ordinary act of decency that didn't feel like it deserved remembering. A generator had caught fire in the old barn during setup for the county fair. Roy Voss, then just a younger man working the family's construction booth, had gone back in for a toolbox he didn't need, gotten trapped behind a collapsed shelf, and would have died in that smoke if Silas hadn't been walking past and heard him coughing. Silas had pulled him out. Burned his own forearm doing it. Never thought twice about telling anyone. "Because that's not what you did it for. I remember pulling a man out of that barn," Silas said slowly. "I never knew it was him. Different last name back then, before he married into the Voss family business and took the name for the political weight it carried." "That's the piece," Duke said. "You saved that man's life before he was anybody. Before the money, before the council seat, before any of it. And somewhere along the way, he buried that story so deep even his own son never heard about the man who taught him to be brave in that gym the same summer his father almost died." Silas stared at the old report a long time. "That's why he's scared of the past," Silas said quietly. "Not because of what happened to Grady in that gym. Because of what happened to him. A man built his whole reputation on being untouchable, and buried under it is the one summer he almost wasn't. Debt like that," Duke said, "man like Voss, it eats at a person. Easier to bury it than to owe somebody something he can't repay with money." Silas closed the folder slowly. "I didn't save that man's life so he'd owe me anything," he said. "I did it because it was the only decent thing to do. But if he spent 13 years running from that debt instead of honoring it, that tells you everything about the kind of father he's been to that boy." "You going to use this?" Silas thought about it a long moment. "Not as a weapon," he said finally. "Voss doesn't get to buy his way out of what his son did by me holding his old debt over his head. But somebody in that family needs to hear the truth of where courage actually comes from. Maybe it's time Grady learned his father wasn't born untouchable. He was pulled out of a fire by a stranger who expected nothing back." Duke gathered up the folder. Careful with it, like it held something more fragile than paper. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been walking past that barn?" Duke asked. "Every so often," Silas admitted. "Man dies in a fire, his son grows up without a father. Maybe grows up gentler for it, or maybe grows up harder. No way to know. Instead, he grew up with a father who never told him where courage comes from," Duke said. "Seems like the worst version of both outcomes." Silas nodded slowly, staring at the folder in his old friend's hands. "That's the tragedy sitting under all of this," he said. "Not the fire. Not even the rag around Wren's neck, as much as that one costs me sleep. It's a father who had the chance to teach his son what he owed the world, and chose silence instead. Silence always costs somebody down the line. Just usually not the person who chose it." Duke leaned against the bar, watching his old friend a long moment. "You ever think about what you'd have done different," Duke asked, "if it had been your own boy instead of hers?" "I never had a son," Silas said, "just Claire. And I taught her the same things I taught Wren. Different times, same lesson, and if you'd had a boy?" Silas considered it, turning the question over, slow the way he turned over everything that actually mattered. "I'd like to think I'd have taught him the same thing," he said. "That strength isn't about what you can make somebody else feel. It's about what you're willing to carry so somebody else doesn't have to." Voss never learned that lesson. "No," Silas agreed. "And now his boy's out there without it either, same as he was 13 years ago in that gym, except now he's old enough for the stakes to actually hurt somebody." Duke was quiet a moment, the clubhouse humming low around them, a couple of the younger members playing cards near the back, a radio murmuring something about weather for the weekend. "You scared of what tomorrow brings?" Duke asked finally. Silas looked at his old friend, 30 years of shared road between them, and answered the way he always did when the question actually mattered. "Every worthwhile thing I've ever done, I was scared going into it," he said. "Fear's not the problem. Standing still because of it, that's the problem. Tomorrow we don't stand still." Duke nodded slowly, raising what was left of his coffee in something like a toast. "To not standing still then. To not standing still." That same evening, Dean Whitfield sat alone in his office long after everyone else had gone home, a folder of a different kind open in front of him. He hadn't told Silas the whole truth the week before. The pressure from Roy Voss was still sitting on him, the same quiet reminder about funding that had made him look away from the storage room in the first place, and it hadn't gotten any easier to carry since. Nothing explicit. Voss never said anything explicit, just enough of a reminder to make a tired Dean look the other way a little longer than he should have. Whitfield pulled the security footage from the storage room out of the drawer where it had sat, unreviewed, since the day it happened. He watched it, alone, door locked, watched the rag, watched Wren's hands move faster than anyone should have expected, watched her step back afterward, clearly choosing, not to finish what her body was fully capable of finishing, watched Grady's face, close to her ear, saying words the audio barely caught, ugly words about her being sorry, about doing his homework. Whitfield sat back in his chair, hands trembling slightly. He didn't delete the footage. He didn't send it anywhere yet either, but he saved a copy onto a drive he kept at home, separate from the school system entirely. The first quiet act of a conscience finally starting to wake back up. He thought about his own daughter, grown now, out of state, a teacher herself. He thought about what she'd say if she ever learned her father had watched a video like this and done nothing with it for a week. That thought sat heavier than anything Roy Voss had ever said to him. He locked the drive in his desk, told himself he'd decide what to do with it soon. Soon turned out to be sooner than he expected. Silas worked late in his own garage that night, preparing the memorial motorcycle for a ride the following weekend, a yearly tradition where the Iron Wolves escorted a procession honoring veterans and lost members of the community. The bike had belonged to Claire, Wren's mother, before the accident. Silas kept it running not out of sentiment alone, but because some machines carry a person's memory better than any photograph could. Wren came out to the porch around 9, quiet, watching him through the open garage door. "You still riding her in the procession next weekend?" she asked. "Every year," Silas said. "Long as I've got hands that can hold handlebars, I will." She came and sat on the porch step, and after a moment, Silas set down his rag and joined her there, the night settling cool and clear around them. "I miss her," Wren said quietly. "Every day," Silas said. "Doesn't get smaller. You just get bigger around it." They sat together a long moment in comfortable silence, the kind two people share when grief has finally settled into something less sharp, something you can hold instead of something that holds you. "Tomorrow's the fair," Wren said finally. "I know, you worried?" Silas looked at his granddaughter steady. "I've learned something this week," he said, "about debts, about fathers who bury what scares them instead of facing it. Grady Voss is walking into that fair tomorrow carrying more history than he understands. Same as you are. What do I do if he tries something?" Silas considered the question a long moment, the same patient consideration he gave every question that actually mattered. "You do what your training taught you," he said. "Not revenge, not showing off. Just protect what needs protecting and let the truth do the rest of the work." "Can I ask you something else?" Wren said. "Always do you think Grady's a bad person? Or just somebody who never had anybody teach him better?" Silas thought about the photograph Duke had shown him. The small boy in the oversized gi, grinning up at a version of himself 13 years younger. "I think there's a difference," he said, "between people who do wrong because something wrong was done to them first, and people who just enjoy the doing. One of those things can still be turned around. The other one usually can't. Which one's Grady?" "I don't know yet," Silas admitted. "Tomorrow might tell us." Wren was quiet a moment, looking out at the dark tree line beyond the yard. "Can I tell you something I haven't said out loud yet?" she asked. "Always, part of me is scared that if I ever really let go tomorrow, really show what I can do without holding back, people are going to look at me different. Not just Grady's friends. Everybody. Like I'm something to be careful around instead of somebody they know." Silas thought about that a long moment before answering, the way he thought about anything that actually mattered. "Some people might," he admitted. "Small towns are funny that way. They love a story until the story gets too big for their comfort. But the people worth keeping around, the Odessas of this world, the Dukes, they're not going to see you different. They're going to see you clearer. There's a difference." "How do you know the difference?" "Because I've lived both sides of it," Silas said. "Folks who feared me for what I could do, and folks who trusted me because of what I chose not to do with it. Trust always outlasts fear. Takes longer to build, but it lasts." Wren nodded slowly, letting that settle into her the way training had once had to settle into her body, over years of quiet, patient mornings. Whatever happened tomorrow, Silas says. You remember one thing for me? What's that? You were never nobody. Not before any of this, and not after. Whatever that boy or his friends try to make you feel on that stage, that's not the truth of you. It's just noise somebody's throwing at the truth of you, hoping it sticks. Neither of them slept easily that night, both of them lying awake in different rooms of the same quiet house, thinking about the same gravel road that would carry them into town tomorrow, toward a stage neither one had built, but both would have to stand on before the day was through. Just after midnight, while Silas finally drifted into a thin, uneasy sleep, headlights swept briefly across the ceiling of his bedroom and vanished. He didn't wake for it. Not right away. It was the sound 20 minutes later, the specific, unmistakable crash of metal against concrete that brought him upright in bed, heart hammering, 30-year-old instincts firing before his mind had even finished catching up. He grabbed a flashlight and moved fast for a man his age, out the back door, across the yard, toward the garage where the side door hung open, splintered at the frame. Inside, the memorial motorcycle lay on its side, the mirror shattered, the tank dented deep on one side, the paint scraped down to bare metal in a long, deliberate gouge. The seat, Claire's seat, worn soft by her hands, sliced open, stuffing spilling out onto the concrete floor. Silas stood frozen in the doorway a long moment, flashlight beam shaking slightly in his grip, something in his chest cracking open in a way 13 years of hard living hadn't managed to do. Wren appeared behind him, barefoot, breathless, having heard the crash from her room. "Grandpa," she stopped in the doorway, seeing what he saw. For a moment neither of them said anything at all. "Who would do this?" Wren finally whispered. Silas knelt slowly beside the wreckage, running a careful hand along the dented tank, the way you'd touch a wound on someone you loved. "I have a guess," he said quietly, "but I intend to know for certain before I say a name out loud." He thought of Roy Voss's visit 2 days before. The warning about old history, the careful, practiced threat wrapped in friendly language. It would have been easy, standing in that wreckage at 1 a.m, to assume the worst, that Voss had sent somebody out to send a message, to punish Silas for asking questions about a fire 13 years buried. But something about the damage didn't sit right in Silas's gut, too personal, too angry. Not the calculated work of a hired hand doing a job and leaving quietly. This was rage, young rage. The kind that doesn't plan ahead, just reacts and regrets it seconds later. He noticed something on the workbench that hadn't been there before, a single dropped item, half hidden beneath an oil rag, easy to miss unless you were looking carefully. A class ring, Marion County Technical College, engraved with initials on the inside band G. Silas stood there a long moment, staring at the ring in his palm, the truth settling into him slow and heavy, more complicated than the simple villain story he'd almost believed 20 seconds earlier. Not Roy Voss, Grady. Wren came to stand beside him, saw the ring in his hand, understood immediately what it meant. "He did this," she said quietly. "Not really a question." "Looks that way," Silas said. "Why would he?" "Because something's eating at that boy," Silas said slowly, working it through even as he spoke it. "Same way it ate at his father 13 years ago. Fear doesn't just disappear because you bury it. It comes out sideways, ugly." Aimed at whatever's closest, he set the ring down carefully on the workbench, next to the wreckage of a motorcycle that had carried more memory than metal. "Tomorrow," Silas said, "that boy walks into the fair carrying 2 things he doesn't understand yet. A father's buried debt, and a guilt he doesn't know how to hold. What are we going to do?" Silas looked at his granddaughter, steady despite the wreckage around them, despite the late hour. "Tomorrow," he said, "we let the truth walk out onto that stage, whether anybody invited it or not. Yours, his father's, all of it, 2 miles across town, in a bedroom that looked more like a hotel suite than a teenager's room." Grady sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his bare right hand. He kept turning it over, like the absence of his class ring might disappear if he looked at it hard enough. He didn't remember driving out to Maple Hollow Road with a plan. That was the part that scared him most, replaying it now in the dark. There hadn't been a plan, just a boiling, wordless anger that had built all week, ever since the rumor about the wrist trick started making him feel small in front of his own friends, and he hadn't known what to do with that feeling except point it at something. He remembered breaking the garage door, remembered the old motorcycle sitting there under its cover, and some ugly, thoughtless part of him deciding that hurting something Silas Boone loved would even the score somehow, would make the smallness go away. It hadn't worked. If anything, standing over that wrecked motorcycle in the dark, he'd felt smaller than he had all week, sick with something he didn't have a name for yet. He thought about calling his father. decided against it fast. His father's answer to problems was always the same: money, pressure, a phone call to somebody who owed him a favor. Grady had watched that pattern his whole life and had never once seen his father sit with a mistake long enough to actually feel bad about it. Grady sat with his for the first time that night, alone, and found he didn't like the taste of it at all. He didn't sleep either. He kept thinking back to a memory he hadn't visited in years, maybe 10 years old, asking his father about a faint scar on his forearm, the one his father always brushed off with a joke and a change of subject. He'd never once heard the real story. Not once in 13 years. Not even a version softened for a child's ears. He thought about every lesson his father had ever actually taught him, stripped now of the polish he'd always assumed covered something solid underneath. Handle it. Make it disappear. Never let anybody see the crack. He'd built his whole identity on those lessons without ever once questioning where they came from, or what they'd cost the people underneath them. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, he pulled his phone out and typed a message to Ren he never sent, deleted it, typed it again, deleted it again. He didn't know yet how to apologize for something this size. Didn't know if an apology this late was worth anything at all, but something in him, small and unfamiliar, had started wanting to try anyway. At sunrise, Silas stood in the wreckage of his garage with a cup of black coffee going cold in his hand, staring at the dented tank of his daughter's motorcycle like a man visiting a grave. Ren came out around 6, dressed already for the fair, dark circles under her eyes, from a night neither of them had slept through. "You look like you've been standing here all night," she said. "Some of it," Silas admitted. "What are we going to do about the ring?" Silas set his coffee down on the workbench, next to the class ring still sitting where he'd left it. "I've been thinking on that," he said. "Wrong way to do this is march into that fair and shove this ring in Grady's face in front of everybody. That's Voss's way of doing things, humiliation as a weapon. I won't stoop to it, even with good reason. So what's the right way?" "Give the boy a chance to come to it himself," Silas said. "Truth has a way of finding daylight on its own when you don't force it. I intend to let today do some of that work, and see what he does with the room I give him." Ren studied her grandfather a long moment, a mixture of respect and disbelief crossing her face. "After what he did to your garage? To Mom's bike?" "I'm angrier about that than I know how to say out loud," Silas admitted, voice rough. "But anger's a poor architect. Builds ugly things fast and none of them last." He wrapped an arm around his granddaughter's shoulders, both of them looking at the wrecked motorcycle together in the pale early light. "Today's going to ask a lot of both of us," Silas said. "You, standing on that stage with everybody watching, me, standing beside a debt I only just learned I was owed. Let's go meet it together." Ren nodded slowly, the tiredness in her eyes hardening into something steadier. Together, she echoed. They drove into town an hour later, the wrecked motorcycle left behind under its torn cover, the ring sitting wrapped carefully in Silas's jacket pocket. Evidence and offering both, waiting for the moment it would matter most. The banner at the school still read, "Fall Traded Fair," the countdown finally reaching its last number, the marker crossing out the final box on the wall calendar, with nobody left to notice the small ceremony of it. Somewhere, across town, Roy Voss was rehearsing a speech he planned to give from the small stage that afternoon. Words about community and hard work and the value of a trade well learned, unaware that his own hidden history was about to become part of the story whether he invited it or not. He'd slept fine the night before, better than he probably deserved to, certain that whatever Silas Boone had learned about the old fire, it would stay buried a while longer under the weight of a councilman's reputation. He had no way of knowing his own son had spent that same night wide awake 2 miles away, turning over a truth neither father nor son had ever said out loud to each other. Dean Whitfield arrived at the fairgrounds early that morning, too, the flash drive still sitting in his desk drawer back at the school, a decision he still hadn't fully made, though something in him had shifted enough overnight that he no longer trusted himself to leave it there much longer. Sheriff Kessler parked his cruiser near the food tents an hour before the gates opened, exactly as promised, keeping half an eye on the crowd, the way a man does when his gut tells him more than his evidence can prove yet. And somewhere on a gravel road just outside town, an old truck carried a grandfather and his granddaughter toward a day that neither of them had asked for, but both of them, in their own quiet ways, had spent their whole lives preparing to meet. Ren rode with the class ring wrapped in a cloth in her grandfather's jacket pocket, evidence of a truth about to surface one way or another. Silas drove with both hands steady on the wheel, the ache in his chest from a wrecked motorcycle sitting quiet under a calm she'd spent 30 years learning to hold on to, even when everything in him wanted to reach for anger instead. Neither one of them said much on that last drive into town. They didn't need to. Someone understanding doesn't require words. It just requires two people who trust each other enough to walk into the unknown side by side and let whatever's waiting there meet them exactly as they are. The Marion County Fall Trade Fair opened at 9 that morning, under a sky scrubbed clean by an early rain. Trucks lined the gravel lot in rows. Families walked between booths carrying funnel cakes and folding chairs. A stage stood at the center of it all, banners snapping in the wind, waiting for whatever the day intended to put on it. Silas parked his truck at the edge of the field, Wren beside him, both of them quiet in the way people get before something they can't quite name is about to happen. "You still have it?" Wren asked, nodding toward his jacket pocket. Silas patted the small weight of the class ring resting there. "I do. What are you going to do with it?" "Give the boy a chance," Silas said, "before I give anybody else a reason." They walked the fairgrounds together, past the diesel demonstration tent, past a table selling raffle tickets for a shotgun nobody in this county needed but everybody wanted anyway. Dean Whitfield spotted them near the welding booth and crossed the crowd with a tightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there the week before. "Mr. Boone," he said. "Wren, glad you both came. Wouldn't have missed it," Silas said, studying the man's face. Something in it had shifted since their last conversation. Less armor. "More weight. I need to tell you something," Whitfield said quietly, glancing around to make sure nobody stood close enough to hear. "I watched the footage. From the storage room. All of it." Wren's breath caught slightly. "I should have watched it the first day," Whitfield continued. "I didn't. I let a phone call from a councilman decide what I was willing to see. That's on me, and I know it. What are you going to do about it now?" Silas asked. "I brought a copy today," Whitfield said. "On a drive, in my jacket. I haven't decided the right moment yet, but I intend to make sure the truth doesn't stay buried in my desk drawer any longer." Silas studied him a long moment, then nodded once. The closest thing to forgiveness the morning had room for yet. "Today's going to give you plenty of moments to choose from," Silas said. "Make sure you pick a good one." Silas found Duke near the raffle table, arms crossed, watching the crowd with the same quiet alertness he'd carried his whole life. "You look like a man expecting weather," Duke said. "I am," Silas replied. "Voss knows I've been digging. Question is how far he's willing to go to keep it buried. You think he'd try something here? In front of half the county? Men like Voss don't get their hands dirty themselves," Silas said. "They send somebody else to do the dirty part and keep their own hands clean enough to shake at the ribbon cutting after." Duke nodded slowly, scanning the crowd out of old habit, the same watchfulness that had kept both men alive through harder years than this one. "I've got 4 of the boys posted around the fairgrounds," Duke said. "Nothing obvious. Just eyes. Appreciate it. You think Wren's ready for whatever today throws at her?" Silas looked out across the field, toward the stage where Wren stood talking quietly with Odessa, the crowd beginning to gather for the afternoon's events. "She's been ready longer than she knows," Silas said. "Question was never whether she's ready. Question was always whether the world was going to give her a fair enough moment to prove it, and is it?" Silas's jaw tightened slightly, some old instinct stirring under his ribs. "Not yet," he said. "But it's about to," he thought back, standing there in the gathering crowd noise, to the conversation he'd had with Wren the night before, on the porch, in the dark, about the difference between people who do wrong because something was done to them, and people who just enjoy the doing. He still didn't know which one Grady was. He had a feeling the day was about to answer that question whether anybody wanted it answered or not. "One more thing," Duke said, lowering his voice further. "Ellen Marsh is here today, setting up the county archive booth same as every year. Told me if things came to a head, she'd back up whatever you needed to say publicly. Said she's carried that fire story quietly long enough." Sis nodded slowly, grateful in a way he didn't have words handy for. "Appreciate her more than she knows," he said. "She knows," Duke said. "Woman like that always knows exactly how much she's worth to the people around her. Just waits to be asked." Near the podium where he'd give his remarks that afternoon, Roy Voss ran through his notes one more time out of habit more than necessity. He'd given this same speech, in one form or another, at a dozen county events over the years. A man approached him from the side of the tent, wearing a work jacket with the Voss Construction logo stitched over the pocket. Dale Hargrove had been the company's site foreman for almost 15 years. ever since Voss's construction business had grown large enough to need somebody else running the crews day to day. "Roy," Hargrove said, low, urgent. "We need to talk." "Not now, Dale. I'm on in 3 hours. It's about the barn fire." 13 years back, Voss's pen stopped moving across his notes. "What about it?" he said carefully, words going around that Boone's been asking questions, digging up old records at the library. Talking to Ellen Marsh, Voss set his notes down slowly. "I already spoke to him. Told him to let it lie. He didn't listen," Hargrove said, "and Roy, if this goes further, it's not just your old secret that gets dragged out. It's mine too." Voss's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Hargrove's jaw tightened, old guilt flickering behind years of careful denial. "That generator that caught fire," he said quietly. "I was the one who signed off on the safety inspection that week. I knew the wiring was bad. I told myself it'd hold till after the fair. It didn't. You nearly died because I cut a corner to save the company 2 days of downtime." Voss stared at him, something cold moving through his chest. "You're telling me now," he said slowly. "After 13 years, I'm telling you because if Boone finds the old inspection paperwork, it won't just be an old story about a fire anymore," Hargrove said. "It'll be a story about criminal negligence. About a company that spent 13 years building your political career on top of a lie." Voss looked out at the fairgrounds, the families, the banners, the life he'd built so carefully on top of a debt he'd never once acknowledged out loud. Quietly, "I don't care how. I have an election in 14 months, Dale. I will not let an old fire and an old inspection form take that away from me." Hargrove nodded once and walked off into the crowd, already turning over what handling it quietly might actually require of him before the day was through. Neither man noticed Grady standing 20 feet away, half hidden behind a vendor tent, having heard every word. Grady stood frozen behind the tent for a long moment after his father and Hargrove walked away in separate directions. He'd come looking for his father to ask about the demonstration slot, a small, ordinary errand, and instead had overheard something that rearranged everything he thought he understood about his own family. His father hadn't almost died in some noble accident, a story Grady had heard exactly once as a child and never again. His father had almost died because somebody cut a corner to save money, and had spent 13 years since building a life on top of silence about it. And now his father's answer to a threatened truth was the same answer it had always been to everything: handle it quietly. "I don't care how." Grady thought about the class ring sitting somewhere in Silas Boone's jacket pocket. Evidence of his own worst night, evidence of a truth he still hadn't found the courage to face directly. He thought about Wren, and the storage room, and the rag, and the ugly satisfaction he'd felt watching her apologize, a satisfaction that had curdled into something like shame every day since. He thought about that phrase his father used constantly, without ever seeming to hear how hollow it sounded: handle it. His whole life, Grady realized, standing there behind that tent, had been built on the same principle. Never face the actual problem, just make sure it disappears from view. Make sure it never costs you anything you can see. He remembered being maybe 6 years old, asking his father about a faint scar on his forearm, the one his father always brushed off with a joke and a change of subject. He'd never once heard the real story, not once in 13 years, not even a version softened for a child's ears. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with what he'd just heard. But something in him, quiet and unfamiliar, had started leaning toward the opposite of everything his father had just taught him to do. He kept walking, past the vendor tents, past the smell of funnel cake and diesel fuel, past a version of himself he was starting to understand he didn't want to be anymore. He didn't know yet that within the hour, he'd be standing in front of the whole county, finally saying out loud everything he'd spent 5 days too afraid to admit even to himself. Wren found a quiet bench near the animal pens an hour before the open mic session, trying to settle her nerves before whatever the afternoon intended to demand of her. Odessa found her there, sliding onto the bench beside her without asking. "You ready?" Odessa asked. "No," Wren admitted. "Not even a little." "Good. Anybody who says they're ready for something like this is lying to themselves." Wren managed a small laugh despite the tightness in her chest. "Whatever they've got planned," Odessa said, "you don't owe them a performance. You don't owe anybody proof of anything. You already know what you're capable of. That's enough, whether or not today ever asks you to show it." Wren nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "My grandfather said something similar last night," she said, "about letting the truth do the work instead of trying to win something." "Your grandfather sounds like a smart man." "He usually is," Wren said. "Doesn't make today any easier." They sat together a while, watching families pass, watching the ordinary rhythm of a county fair moving forward, unaware of everything gathering quietly beneath its surface. "Whatever happens," Odessa said finally, standing to head toward the crowd, "I'll be right there, front row. Try not to make me watch anything too disturbing." "No promises," Ren said, the ghost of a real smile finally reaching her face. The open mic session began at 2 that afternoon. A wooden stage set up between the main tent and the judging tables. A crowd of several hundred gathered loosely around it in folding chairs and standing clusters. Grady's plan, built carefully over the last few days, called for a diesel diagnostics demonstration, a public setting where he and his friends would ask Ren, in front of everyone, to walk through a repair sequence they knew she hadn't been taught yet. Engineered to make her fail publicly, deniably. No rag required this time. Cody signed them both up, under the guise of a peer demonstration exercise, standard enough that Dean Whitfield had approved it without a second look, weeks earlier. Ren didn't know the trap was coming until she was already called up. Next up, the announcer said, checking his clipboard, "We've got a demonstration from Cody Rayner and Ren Boone. Diesel fuel injection sequencing." A ripple of quiet interest moved through the crowd. Silas, standing near the back with Duke and several other Iron Wolves, felt his jaw tighten immediately. He hadn't heard about this pairing. Neither had Ren. She walked up onto the stage slow, aware immediately of the setup, aware of Grady standing just off to the side with his friends, all of them watching with the particular stillness of people waiting to enjoy something. Cody handed her a diagram, printed deliberately dense and confusing, a sequence 2 levels beyond what their coursework had actually covered. "Go ahead," Cody said, voice pitched just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Walk us through it." Ren looked at the diagram a long moment. She recognized immediately what was happening. Not a fair test, a public trap designed to make her fumble in front of the whole county while looking, to anyone not paying close attention, like an innocent classroom exercise. She set the diagram down. "I'm not going to guess my way through something I haven't been taught," Ren said, voice steady, carrying clearly across the quiet crowd. "That's not a demonstration. That's a setup." A murmur moved through the audience. Cody's face flushed. "You're just embarrassed you don't know it," Cody said. "A little too fast, a little too loud." "I know plenty," Ren said. "I know the difference between a real lesson and somebody trying to make me look small in front of an audience. I'm not interested in playing along with the second one." An older woman in the 3rd row, somebody's grandmother out for the afternoon, leaned toward her neighbor. "That girl's got more sense than the boy running this whole thing," she said, loud enough for a small ripple of chuckles to move through the nearby seats. Grady stood at the edge of the stage, watching this unfold, the sentence his father had spoken behind the tent still echoing in his skull. "Handle it, quietly." I don't care how he'd spent days building this exact moment, expecting it to feel like winning. It didn't. It felt like watching a mirror. "Grady?" Cody said, uncertain now. "Back me up here." Grady opened his mouth. Nothing came out at first. The crowd waited, that particular restless quiet of several hundred people sensing something shifting beneath the surface of an ordinary afternoon. Before Cody could recover a response, movement stirred at the back of the crowd, not planned, not part of anybody's careful arrangement, but real and sudden enough that heads began turning. Dale Hargrove moved through the crowd fast, jaw tight, eyes locked on Silas Boone standing near the Iron Wolves cluster. He'd spent the last hour convincing himself there was only one way to make sure Silas's questions never reached anywhere dangerous. Get to the man directly, quietly, before the afternoon speeches and the crowd's attention gave Boone any opening to say something in public that couldn't be walked back. "Boone," Hargrove said, low and urgent, closing the distance. "We need to talk now." Silas turned, recognizing the name stitched on the jacket, recognizing something coiled and desperate in the man's posture that hadn't been there in any conversation he'd had all week. "You're the foreman," Silas said. "Voss Construction." "I need that folder," Hargrove said. "The old inspection records. Whatever Ellen Marsh gave you." The crowd nearby began to notice, conversations trailing off, attention shifting subtly toward the tension building at the edge of the stage area. "That folder's not yours to ask for," Silas said, voice even, though his whole body had gone still and alert in a way 30 years of training never fully switched off. "You don't understand what's at stake," Hargrove said, voice rising now, the careful composure cracking fast. "That inspection was mine. I signed off on a job I knew wasn't safe. If that comes out, it's not just Voss's career, it's mine. My family's whole life." "Then you should have thought about that 13 years ago," Silas said. before you let a good man nearly burn alive to save your company 2 days of downtime. Something in Hargrove's face broke loose entirely at that sentence. 13 years of buried guilt curdling fast into something reckless and desperate. He grabbed for the jacket pocket where he'd guessed correctly that Silas might be carrying something related to the folder, not the ring, not evidence, just an old man's papers he imagined might still be on him. Silas moved a step back, 64 years old, still fast enough to avoid the worst of it. But Hargrove's shove caught him off balance, sending him stumbling hard against the edge of the stage steps. The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock finally breaking the last of the calm afternoon atmosphere. And that was the moment everything the last 3 years of quiet 5:30 mornings had built inside Wren Boone finally had somewhere real to go. Wren moved before she'd finished deciding to. She came off the stage fast, closing the distance in under 2 seconds, placing herself directly between Hargrove and her grandfather, with the same economy of motion Silas had drilled into her 1,000 mornings in a row. Hargrove, still riding the momentum of his own panic, turned toward her without registering, at first, exactly what he was facing. "Get out of the way," he snapped. "No," Wren said. He grabbed for her arm the way Grady's friends had grabbed for her weeks earlier in the storage room, expecting the same soft compliance, the same fear folding easily into whatever shape he needed it to take. He got nothing like that this time. Wren's hand caught his wrist mid-motion, dropped her weight, turned her hips, and put him on the ground in front of several hundred witnesses in under 3 seconds. Not a wild scramble, not panic, but the clean, controlled economy of 3 years, spent training for exactly this kind of moment, and choosing, every single morning, not to waste a single motion of it. Hargrove hit the ground hard, breath knocked loose, stunned into stillness by how fast and how completely the smaller, quieter girl in front of him had ended the confrontation before it had properly begun. The crowd erupted into a sound somewhere between a gasp and applause, nobody quite sure which reaction the moment called for. Odessa, standing near the front row exactly where she'd promised to be, let out a short, disbelieving laugh, half shock and half fierce pride, watching her friend end a grown man's attack in less time than it took most people to finish a sentence. An older man nearby, a veteran himself judging by the cap he wore, turned to his wife with something like recognition in his eyes. "That's not luck," he said quietly. "That's years of somebody teaching her right." Sheriff Kessler, who had been standing near the food tents exactly as promised, moved through the crowd fast, badge already out, cuffs already in hand. "Stay down," Kessler said to Hargrove, voice flat and certain. "You're under arrest for assault." Hargrove, winded and beaten, didn't resist. He lay there a moment, staring up at the sky, all 13 years of careful silence finally collapsing in front of the one audience he'd spent over a decade trying to avoid. Silas pushed himself back up from where he'd stumbled against the stage steps, more startled than hurt, watching his granddaughter standing steady over the man who'd just tried to hurt him. He felt something complicated move through his chest, watching her, pride mostly, but underneath it, a smaller ache he hadn't expected. All those quiet mornings, all those years of training a girl he loved to be ready for exactly this kind of moment, and here it finally was, playing out in front of the whole county on an ordinary Friday afternoon. For a long moment, the whole fairground held its breath. Then Grady did something nobody watching expected, least of all himself. He stepped forward, out of the crowd, out from behind whatever careful invisibility his last name usually afforded him, and spoke loud enough for the whole gathering to hear. "I heard him talking to my father earlier," Grady said, voice unsteady but clear, behind the tent, about covering up an old fire report, about handling it quietly, whatever that meant. "I heard the whole thing." A hush fell over the crowd, thicker than before. Roy Voss, standing near the podium with his prepared remarks still folded in his hand, went pale, watching his own son dismantle 13 years of careful science in front of the entire county. "Grady?" Voss said, low, warning. "No, Dad," Grady said, turning to face him directly, something breaking loose in his voice that had been building far longer than the last few days. "I'm done handling things quietly. I already tried that my whole life, watching you do it. Look where it got us." He turned back to the crowd, to Kessler standing with Hargrove now cuffed on the ground, to Wren still standing steady where she'd stopped Hargrove cold. "I also want to say something else," Grady said, voice shaking now, but not stopping. "I broke into Mr. Boone's garage a few nights ago, wrecked his motorcycle, his daughter's motorcycle. I left my class ring behind by accident, and I've spent every day since too much of a coward to admit it." The crowd's murmur shifted again, disbelief now tangled with something closer to reluctant respect. I did that because I was angry, Grady continued, about a rumor going around that Wren wasn't as easy to push around as I wanted her to be. I've spent my whole life pushing people around because it was the only thing I ever saw modeled for me. I'm not proud of that. I'm done pretending I am. He looked at Wren directly, something raw and unguarded in his face for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, weeks earlier, in a storage room neither of them would ever fully forget. I'm sorry, Grady said, for the storage room, for the fair, for all of it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it in front of everybody, the way I should have said it the first time, instead of hiding behind my father's name. The fairground stood in stunned silence, several hundred witnesses watching a story rewrite itself in real time. Sheriff Kessler led Hargrove away from the fairgrounds 20 minutes later, statements already being taken from witnesses, the whole tangled history of the old barn fire finally beginning its slow unraveling into daylight. Dean Whitfield, standing near the stage with the flash drive still in his jacket pocket, stepped forward and handed it directly to Kessler without a word of hesitation, the footage from the storage room finally moving into hands that would use it properly. Roy Voss stood alone near the podium for a long moment, his prepared remarks still folded uselessly in his hand, watching the wreckage of his own careful silence settle over the fairgrounds in full view of everyone he'd spent years trying to impress. He crossed the distance to where Silas stood, still catching his breath from the fall against the stage steps. I owe you an apology, Voss said quietly. More than one, it seems. You do, Silas said. No anger in it, just plain fact. 13 years ago, you pulled me out of a fire, Voss said. I've spent every year since running from what that meant, instead of honoring it. I built a whole life on top of silence and taught my son to do the same thing without ever meaning to. Silas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the class ring, holding it out. Your boy left this behind, Silas said. In my garage. Along with a debt he's going to have to work off one way or another. But I'd rather see him learn to carry it honestly than watch him spend 13 years running from it the way you did. Voss took the ring, staring at it a long moment, something breaking loose behind his composed politician's face for the first time in longer than he could remember. What happens to Hargrove now? Voss asked. That's the sheriff's business, Silas said. But I'd imagine a signed inspection report on a fire that nearly killed a man tends to matter quite a bit to a judge. Voss exhaled slowly, something like relief and dread mixed together in the sound. My company, he said. My whole career. It might not survive this. Might not, Silas agreed, no comfort offered, none owed. But better it doesn't survive built on a lie than survive another 13 years the same way. I don't know how to fix what I've broken in that boy, Voss admitted quietly. 13 years of teaching him the wrong lesson. That's not something an apology undoes overnight. No, Silas agreed. It isn't, but it's a start. Most men never even manage that much. Thank you, Voss said quietly, for the fire, for this, for not letting either of us bury it any longer. Don't thank me, Silas said. Thank your son. He's the one who finally said it out loud. Voss looked over at Grady, standing a short distance away, still absorbing the weight of what he'd just done in front of the entire county. I don't know how to fix what I've broken in that boy, Voss repeated quietly, mostly to himself now. I keep thinking about all the times he came to me scared about something, and I told him to toughen up instead of asking him what actually scared him. I thought that was strength, teaching him not to feel it. Strength isn't the absence of feeling something, Silas said. It's what you do with it once you've let yourself feel it honestly. That's a harder lesson to teach a child than toughen up. Takes more of you to teach it. I don't know if I have more of me left to give him, Voss admitted. Not after today. You'd be surprised, Silas said. Most men find more in themselves than they think, once they stop spending all their energy hiding from what scares them. Voss nodded slowly, turning the ring over once more in his palm before slipping it into his own pocket, a small, deliberate gesture of carrying his son's mistake alongside him for a while, the way a father should have been doing all along. I'm going to withdraw from the council race, Voss said suddenly, like the decision had only just finished forming as he said it out loud. Not because the story will end my chances. Because I don't think I should hold a seat built on the reputation I built by burying this. Silas studied him a long moment. That's your decision to make. Not mine to weigh in on, I know, Voss said. I just wanted somebody to hear me say it before I lost my nerve. He walked back toward his son a moment later. The first real conversation between them in longer than either could probably remember waiting somewhere just ahead of this moment. That evening, as the fairgrounds began emptying and the last of the vendor tents came down, A smaller gathering formed near the Boone family truck. Grady approached slowly, hands in his pockets, uncertain of his welcome. "I know I don't deserve to just be forgiven," he said to Wren. "I'm not asking for that. I just wanted to say it again, without a crowd watching this time. I'm sorry. For everything." Wren studied him a long moment, weighing weeks of fear and cruelty against the raw, unguarded apology standing in front of her now. "You did something today most people your age never manage," she said finally. "You told the truth even when it cost you something. That doesn't erase what happened before." "But it's not nothing. What do I do now?" Grady asked. "How do I actually fix any of this?" Silas, standing nearby, answered before Wren could. "You start by working," he said, "every weekend until that motorcycle's repaired properly. With your own hands, not your father's money. And you keep showing up honest. In the small moments, nobody's watching, until honesty stops feeling like something you have to force yourself into." Grady nodded slowly, something steadier settling into his shoulders than had been there all week. "I can do that," he said. "I know," Silas said. "That's why I'm offering it." Wren studied Grady a moment longer, something in her chest loosening slightly, not into forgiveness exactly, but into something adjacent to it. A willingness to let the road ahead decide what came next instead of the storage room deciding it for her. "For what it's worth," she said, the wrist trick people were whispering about. "It's not magic, it's just repetition. Same thing available to anybody willing to actually show up and do the work, morning after morning, long after it stops feeling exciting." "You'd actually teach me that?" Grady asked, surprised. "Not yet," Wren said honestly. "Maybe someday. Right now I think you've got a motorcycle to rebuild and a father to have some hard conversations with." "That's plenty for one season." Grady managed a small, rueful smile, the first genuine one Wren had seen from him since she'd arrived in this town. "Fair enough," he said. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at her once more. "Thank you for not finishing me off up on that stage, back in the storage room too. I know you could have both times." "I know that too," Wren said simply. "Doesn't mean I have to enjoy it to be strong enough to choose otherwise." Grady nodded slowly, letting that settle, and walked off toward his father's truck, a longer, harder road ahead of him than any of them fully understood yet. But a road finally pointed in an honest direction. In the days between the fair and the weeks that followed, the county settled into its new understanding of itself the way small places always eventually do, slowly, then all at once. Dale Hargrove's arrest made the front page of the local paper, alongside a quieter story about a councilman's decades-old debt finally coming to light. Roy Voss didn't run from the story this time. He gave one honest interview, the only one he'd ever given in his political career, admitting plainly that a stranger had saved his life once, and that he'd spent too many years too afraid to say so. It didn't end his career the way he'd always feared honesty might. If anything, people in Marion County seemed to trust him more, not less, once the polish came off and something real stood underneath it. Dean Whitfield resigned from his position 2 weeks after the fair, not in disgrace, but by his own quiet choice. He told the school board he'd let politics decide too many things that should have been decided by conscience instead, and that he didn't trust himself to lead fairly until he'd spent some time relearning where that line actually sat. He took a smaller job teaching shop class at a school 2 towns over, closer, he said, to why he'd gotten into education in the first place. Wren finished the semester at Marion County Technical College with the best marks in her diesel systems class. Grady sitting 2 stations down from her most days now, quieter, steadier, working through his own slow repair alongside the literal one happening in Silas's garage every weekend. The first weekend, Grady hadn't said much, working silently under Silas's direction, flinching every time he made a mistake, waiting for the old man to finally lose patience with him the way his father always eventually did. Silas never did. Mistakes are just information. Silas told him the third weekend, watching Grady sand a scratch too hard and gouge the metal further. "Slow down. Feel the grain before you push against it. Why are you even letting me do this?" Grady asked eventually, sanding block still in his hand. After everything, Silas considered the question the way he considered every question that actually mattered. "Because your father taught you that mistakes get buried," Silas said. "I'd rather teach you that mistakes get repaired. Different lesson. Better one, I think." Grady hadn't had much of an answer for that. He'd just kept sanding, slower this time, feeling the grain the way he'd been told to. By the 5th weekend, something had shifted between them that neither one commented on directly. Grady started arriving early, before Silas had even finished his coffee, letting himself into the garage the way family does, not the way a guest does. "You're here early," Silas said one Saturday. finding Grady already laying out tools. Figured the sooner we start, the sooner it's done right, Grady said. Didn't want to rush it, though. You said rushing's how the scratch happened last time. Silas allowed himself a small, private smile at that, watching the boy who'd once broken this very motorcycle out of rage now handling it with something close to reverence. Your father know you've been coming out here every weekend? Silas asked. He does now, Grady said. Wasn't easy telling him, but I figured if I'm done hiding things, I should probably start with him. How'd he take it? Better than I expected, Grady admitted. Think he's trying to figure out how to do this too. The honest part. Neither of us are very good at it yet. Nobody's good at it at first, Silas said. You just keep showing up to the workbench anyway, and eventually your hands remember what your mouth hasn't figured out how to say yet. 2 weeks after the fair, the Iron Wolves held their annual memorial ride, a procession of motorcycles moving slow through the center of town, honoring the veterans and lost members the club had carried in its memory for decades. Silas rode at the front, the memorial motorcycle fully restored now, Grady having spent every weekend since the fair sanding, repainting, and rebuilding what his own anger had once destroyed, learning patience the same slow way Wren had learned her stance. One careful repetition at a time. Wren rode behind her grandfather on a bike of her own now, something new Silas had helped her build over the 2 weeks since the fair, a small ceremony of trust neither of them said much about out loud. Tucked in her jacket pocket, wrapped carefully in a small plastic sleeve to keep it safe from the wind, sat her mother's handkerchief, the one keepsake that had survived every move, every hard year, every quiet morning of training that had built the woman riding through town today. Silas had given it back to her that morning. Before the ride began, the same worn cloth Claire used to tie back her hair before every ride of her own. Years earlier, your mother used to say something to me before every ride, Silas told her, handing it over. Told me fear doesn't disappear just because you get good at something. You just learn to carry it different. Learn to let it ride behind you instead of in front. Wren tucked the handkerchief into her jacket, the words settling into her chest the way all her grandfather's best lessons eventually did. Slow, then all at once, then permanently. Do you think she'd be proud? Wren asked quietly before they pulled out onto the road. Of how all this turned out? Silas looked at his granddaughter a long moment, something warm and aching moving behind his eyes. I think she'd be proud of who you already were, he said, long before any of this happened. Everything since has just been the world finally catching up to seeing it. The procession rolled through Marion County that afternoon, dozens of motorcycles moving together in steady formation, honoring old debts finally paid, old silences finally broken, and a girl who had trained 3 quiet years for a moment she never wanted and had met it, in the end, exactly the way her grandfather had always hoped she would, not with anger, not with cruelty returned for cruelty, but with steady hands, a clear head, and a truth strong enough to carry the whole county's attention without ever needing to raise its voice. Grady rode near the back of the formation, on a borrowed bike, invited that morning by Silas himself, a small, deliberate act of the same patient decency that had once pulled a stranger from a burning barn without ever expecting anything back. Some debts, it turns out, don't get settled all at once. They get settled slowly, one honest morning at a time, the same way everything worth keeping in this life usually does. That evening, after the procession had wound its way back through town, and the bikes had all found their way home, Silas settled into the old chair on his porch, a fresh cup of coffee cooling in his hand the way it always did when his mind was too full to remember to drink it. Out past the yard, in the last gold light of the day, Wren ran through her stances on the same mat that had rolled out onto that garage floor every morning for 3 years running. She wasn't alone this time. Duke stood nearby, calling out corrections the way Silas used to, and a couple of the younger Iron Wolves leaned against the garage door frame, watching a girl who used to be nobody's business become the whole county's quiet legend. Silas watched her from the porch, the way he'd watched her 1,000 mornings before, and felt something settle in his chest that 13 years of silence, weeks of danger, and one loud, unforgettable Friday afternoon had never quite managed to shake loose pride. Plain and simple, the kind a man only gets to feel once or twice in a lifetime, if he's lucky, and spends the rest of his years grateful for. He raised his coffee cup toward the garage, a small private toast nobody out there noticed him make. There she goes, he said quietly, to no one but himself in the fading light. The sleeping wolf had woken up fully now, not into something fierce and unforgiving, into something steadier than that, into exactly what her grandfather had spent 3 years quietly, patiently, lovingly building her to become. And somewhere further down that same road, a councilman's son rode a little steadier too, learning, one repaired motorcycle at a time, that the strongest thing a man can inherit from his family isn't a name or money or comfort. It's the courage to finally stop hiding from the truth of himself and start building something honest in its place. That, in the end, was the real lesson the whole county carried home from that fair. Not the story of a girl who turned out to be a fighter, though that part traveled fast and far, the way good stories always do. The deeper lesson, the one that actually mattered, was quieter than that. Strength isn't about what you're capable of doing to somebody else. It's about what you're willing to protect and how patiently you're willing to build the character required to protect it well. Silas Boone had spent a lifetime learning that lesson the hard way. He'd spent the last 3 years passing it on, one quiet morning at a time, to a granddaughter who carried it forward into daylight better than he ever could have hoped.